We're here with Kevin Kent, who wrote the screenplay and will be directing a film called Buster and Sarah. Welcome.
Thank you.
It's good to have you here, and I've read quite a bit about the film, and it's a really inspiring story.
Thank you. That's its mission, is to be inspiring.
What when we talk about it, inspirational films, do any come to mind that I don't want to say you necessarily took a cue from, but kind of moved you in a way that you hope your audience is moved by the film?
One of the things that's nuclear to the inspiration for this movie is that I was sitting at my mother's retirement home, and we were talking, and she said to me that, she goes, Kevin, when you were a very small boy, I was quite worried about you because, in fact, you had an imaginary friend that just never seemed to go away. And I didn't remember this at all. And I said, what? And she goes, no, I was really worried about you. You insisted I set the table for him. You'd go for walks with him. You would go to your room and read. I'd bring friends over, and that you'd rather talk to your imaginary friend than real people. And so at the time you were, 6, 7 years old, I was really worried. You'd do puzzles with him. It was just crazy. And so I'm sitting there thinking about this, just astonished. First off, I don't remember this at all, number one. And I'm sitting in a retirement home looking at all these kind of people at the end of their life in God's waiting room, if you will. A very nice retirement home, though. But they're sitting there, and I'm going, there's got to be some kind of interesting or different story about this. And I came home and literally sat down and started typing like a madman and plotting out this idea of this little boy who comes back to somebody when they're 75, 80 years old to help them pass, to help them go through the process of dying. And in a couple days, I'd written the whole story, the whole movie. Showed it to some people. People said it was incredibly inspiring, uplifting. I gave it to some football jock friend of mine. He said it made him cry on the plane. He kept pulling his hat down lower and lower over his head. And but it is one of those kind of stories. It's very compelling. Now, what's it like? I don't know because I wrote it, but people told me that it reminds them of a movie like Cocoon, or reminds them of The Best Exotic Marigold Hotel, one of those kind of inspirational movies. Now, the fact that Buster and Sarah has a whole sequence of events of Buster and Sarah when they're 6 or 7 years old, and a whole sequence of events when they're 20 and when they're 30, and then it cuts to when he's later in his life. I think it covers a lot of a man's life, a lot of his history in this man's life, and it leaves you wanting more. It leaves you, wanting to understand more about what happens to people at this stage of their life. And let's face it, most of us are going to get to that age and are going to be sitting there looking back at our lives and wondering if it was good, if it was bad. Buster's a very compelling character, very compelling.
Is Buster a character who didn't address these kind of things, looking back at his life and the meaning and purpose and the significance of it until he gets to where he realizes it's the end?
Almost. Buster's a person who at the end of his life feels like he got gypped. He was so in love with the Sarah at 20 and 25 and 30, and she was about 30. She got pregnant, had this baby there, and they were just this madly in love couple, the kind you look at and go, wow, I want that, right? And she died in childbirth. Don't want to give away too much of the story. She died in childbirth. So he, from the time he was 30 till he's now 75, lived a life of solitude. He never could find. He knew he would never find another love like that. He raised his daughter on his own. He was always torn between whether he was angry that his daughter looks like his wife and this beautiful, beautiful creature, and did she take her away from him, and all these kind of conflicts that people, unstated conflicts that occur in life. And from that standpoint, Buster is angry. He's mad about life. He feels as though he got ripped off. Now, he's a very successful attorney, very successful man, and early in the movie, he's down to one couple who he still knows, his last friends, and they die early in the movie as well.
But when you say that he is very successful, he's in a life that,
he's successful
by some standards, but does he begin to realize at this stage that maybe how I define successful in terms of, on one hand, it's sort of this dichotomy. You said that he's feeling like he got gypped. In other words,
Yeah.
He looks back and says, maybe my whole life strategy was a farce, wasn't meaningful. And I can't go back and get those years. But he does have some time left to make up for it.
He does, and that's part of what accelerates here at the end of the story with his daughter and with his friends. And but the thing about Buster's, like a lot of single parents, Buster doesn't know whether he's gypped these 30 years, 40 years he's raising this girl, or he's 20 years early on. He doesn't know those things because he's a man on his own, raising a daughter who's just gorgeous and beautiful and happy and go lucky, and she doesn't understand the burden that he carries with him. That he feels as though, did he kill his wife because of something? Did he not do something? And the fact is, it was just it was a horrible birth situation, and she died. And but the feeling of remorse and the feeling of that, that's not what his life was about. His life is about being average to the standpoint that he's now at the end of his life, and he's looking around at all these people. And this is part of the richness of this story, is he sits at a table at the Elysian Gardens, retirement home, and he sits at a table with a Catholic priest, who he's known for a while, with a couple, it's a Protestant couple, with an Indian guru woman, with a Asian Buddhist, with a ladies' man from South Central who goes to the Baptist church, and then after this one couple dies, in shows up Morty with his red Cadillac from New York, waiting to see his old friends, and they've just recently passed on. But he sits at this table, and the interaction between this table is something very special. It's the dialogue just flows, and these people, the conversation between the Indian woman and the Catholic, there's some really, really great moments where he's saying, you can't have a religion with 100 gods. And she goes, if you want just one God, then pick one. It's a great rapport between the characters, and a lot of the way in which Buster's life comes out, and you discover who he is in these conversations at the smart table. And that's a beautiful part of the story, that a lot of people, and right now, if anybody stops and takes a look at their life, is their life successful or a failure? If you're just living life and you're taking care of your family and you're a single parent, are you successful? Are you not successful? You're living.
My sense is that Buster, the character Buster, probably grew up, he's a generation or two older than us. He was probably a GI generation.
That's right.
Where men, in particular, weren't, in our society, they weren't really, it wasn't really about kind of introspective thinking and addressing those kind of what's life worth living. I mean, it was more of what you described as, we go through life, but it does catch up with us.
Yeah.
I mean, whether we want to admit to that or not, it reminds me of that last scene in Saving Private Ryan, when Ryan is, now a grandfather, and he's looking at the grave that, Tom Hanks' character played, and he wants to know one thing, and he, teary-eyed, he looks at his wife and says, tell me I've been a good man. Tell me I've led a good life. And is that's part of what is going on here? That's very much what's going on. And he has that, he's brought forward and fast-forwarded a couple places by his daughter, who is now 40, who's now 10 years older than his wife was when she's died. And and there's one point when she says, Dad, it's my birthday. And she goes, I know your birthday. I'll never forget that day. And of course, it's the day not only his wife is born, but his daughter is born, but his wife dies. And so 40 years, he's looking back on the 40 years, and she's just still trying to get recognition as being, the love of his life. But he has such a hard time dealing with that. And, he has had a very rough life. I mean, Buster's father died during World War II. And he's walking off to school one day, little Sarah, the imaginary finger's looking through the window, waving to him walk to school, and the Army sedan arrives with the flag and his pistol on it. And the mother knows what that means. And so Buster then grows up without any sisters or brothers, and his wife also, Buster's father's wife doesn't remarry. So he grows up a very lonely guy. And the way he deals with his loneliness, the way he deals with his sadness is through this imaginary friend. But the imaginary friend has been gone for almost 70 years. You're making the film in Louisiana.
Yeah.
Territory that you're here in Southern California, and how are you going to learn your way around Louisiana?
Well, the good thing is there are a lot of online sort of scouting things. You can go and look at locations, so I've kind of done that. But I have a partner in Louisiana who has a production company there and has, a lot of resources there. So I plan to fly down in a couple weeks and just start. And we've got a list of locations that we're going to go scout out. And of course, the interesting thing about this movie, I've got to find some place that looks like the 40s, so where his early youth. I've got to find a school that still looks dated. After the hurricanes, who knows, right? Then I've got to find a place that looks like the 50s and 60s, and a place in the 70s, a hospital. I've got some, pretty neat locations to find. One of the things that's interesting I just got a new camera that's got GPS on it. And I went and tried it around here in Newport Beach and Irvine and whatnot. And when you take the shot with it, it puts the exact GPS location of where you are. And it also tells you what lens you're on. So I can, go scout someplace, and at least for my establishing shots, I can stand outside there, and to the foot, I can say, okay, I'm using a 135 prime, and boom, I'm doing a wide angle, and it's a 24, and boom. And it'll tell the DP later exactly where I want him to be, and the lens I'm using, and the whole shot, and the GPS location.
And how does that contrast to what you might have had to do 20 years ago?
Well, I wasn't doing it 20 years ago. I was writing
or
music.
What one was.
The scouting process is actually really fun. To me, the real fun parts are the writing process, the scouting process, the shooting process, the casting process, the post, all the music, putting music in, all those kind of things are all really, really fun. Scouting in particular is when you look at a building and you say, well, that's not what I imagined when I wrote it, but damn, that's a great looking building, or it's better, or the doors are phenomenal. I want to have more stuff of them coming in and out the doors because all these doors are fantastic. Or you look at a school and say, I picture these swings with the kids on the swings kind of near a fence because I've got this very compelling shot of Sarah looking at him through this, through the grates of a iron mesh or whatever, fence, and he's swinging and she gradually disappears as she's going out of his imagination. And so I really want some of the stuff. Now, in New Orleans, all the old ironwork from the French days and stuff, I might find something like far beyond what I pictured, growing up in Southern California, the standard iron mesh fences. So it's like that's a very creative process. And you get with a scouter, a guy who's scouting, and you take your shots and all that stuff. But the scouting guy is actually fairly influential. You can say, look, I've got a picture of some kids running down a beach with balloons, and he may say, well, the beach is here. You're not going to do that. So what you want to do is you want to have, him have some creative control too. So it's very neat. I'm looking forward. I'm going down to New Orleans in a couple weeks, and we'll start the process, and I'll take hundreds, if not thousands, of pictures and bring them back and sort of assemble them as the first line of assembling the shot list for the movie, and it's fun. It's really, really fun.
Well, when will you know when you've got it? In other words, isn't there always another schoolhouse that you want to look at, or another street that you might have, it reminds me of the director, what was his name, from, who directed the Last Picture Show.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
The one who was with Sybil Shepherd, but how clear it was to him when they found the right street in that right town that he didn't have to look any further.
Yeah, it's funny being the writer and the director, because as a director, part of your responsibility is to deliver a very creative, project on time and on budget. Ultimately, that's your responsibility. As the writer, in my mind, what I see could be something that maybe never could be found. Now, you can build something on a set, and you could, go out and construct something. But do I need to construct a school? No. Do I need to construct a hospital? No. So I just need to find something. And I think for every time you make a sacrifice for what you want, you'll find, on another case, you'll find something better.
As I listen to you tell the story about Buster, you might not recognize it, but I do. You're emotional.
Yeah.
You're teary-eyed. And tell me where that comes from.
I'm a very empathetic person. I write my characters to truly come alive. And, in my writing style, when I write, my wife laughs at me. I walk around and I'm reading their lines, and they become more and more compelling to me, and I continue to shave off anything in the dialogue that doesn't sound like Buster, and anything doesn't sound like Vincenzo, anything doesn't sound like, any of the characters. I continue to tighten it down. But Buster, as a man, is just he's amazing, and he wants to love his daughter so badly, but he has so much angst about his life. It's yeah, I can't help it. I mean, this is a story that will make people cry. I mean, it's absolutely that kind of an emotional story.
You're going to be shooting this in Louisiana.
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
Well, I originally, and I'll show some shots to you of when we originally scouted it here, where my mother actually is. There is a smart table. I mean, a lot of these things were borrowed from the characters there. I mean, there is a rocket scientist there. There are a lot of these characters that exist in real life, and of course you tweak them to make them have more conflicts and be more compelling, and so forth and so on. But Louisiana has I mean, it's a time period piece. I don't spend a lot of time in any one period, but it has some shots in the 40s, has some shots in the 50s and 60s, has some shots in the 70s, and then it fast forwards 40 years to now. And in talking with the executive producer, I, kind of reviewed my options. And shooting in California, it's harder and harder to find some place that looks like the 40s or 50s. Shooting in Louisiana, that's not the case. Some of those little towns out in the middle of nowhere look like they did back then. So we optioned to shoot it down there, and I think that for the richness and the fabrics of the visions and of the Buster and Sarah when they're little kids riding bikes and flying kites and finger painting and all this sort of thing, I think it really will match the kind of look and feel that I'm after. And Louisiana's a beautiful place to shoot.
Speaking of the look and feel, you want to tell us a little bit about what you're going to be shooting this film with?
Well, like the last movie, we're going to shoot it with the red cameras. But in the last 6 or 8 months, when I've been doing my research on lenses and new technologies and this sort of stuff, this movie has a lot of flashbacks and a lot of, sort of memory flashbacks of Buster when he was a little child. And, he's 6, I don't know whether he's 6 or 7 or 8, whatever, but when he's running around with Sarah, it can look very ethereal. It can look very beautiful. It can look very, it's historical. And I don't want to just, saturate a little bit more or make it black and white or something like that. And the red folks have come out with a great new technology that allows you to do the same thing with motion pictures is what you could do with HDR photographs. And so HDR is where you'd have a underexposure, middle exposure, and high exposure. You mix them together, you mask some stuff out, and you make it look almost surreal. You make it, some of them can look beautiful. You can overstep it and make it go beyond what it should. But I think for a movie like this to try, and we're going to do some experiments very soon. We're doing some of them right now with the cameras. But we're going to do some experiments on set in the next month or so where we're actually going to see what it looks like shooting in sort of a different reality. Because that's really where we're going with a lot of those early scenes, is a different reality.
From a cost standpoint, this is a commercial venture for you.
Yes.
Tell me about it from the business side.
Well, we shoot very economically, and it's probably be a 20-day shoot for the primary part of the movie, and another 6 or 8 days for the the establishing shots and B-roll and some of these extra special effects I want to do with the kids. But in writing the movie, as I was writing it, I was thinking, okay, so while Buster is 25 or 30 years old, he's going to be a handsome, hunky guy, and his wife is going to be the most beautiful, alluring creature on earth. And I can't say yet who we're going after for those because we haven't got anything inked down yet. But they're going to be beautiful, big stars, and at 25 years old. Now, to try to hire them for a real movie, a 20-day shoot, 25-day shoot, is out of reach. But to tell them to come down to New Orleans for 3 days, then spend the weekend in New Orleans, and we'll get all the shots we need from in those 3 days, and then leave, suddenly it makes it more affordable. And the other thing about it, from an affordability standpoint, which I think is kind of fun, was most of the lead characters are senior citizens, are over 65 years old. Mm-hmm. And, Hollywood can be a cruel place. You hit 65, it's harder and harder to get, movies to be in. harder and harder to get roles. It's harder and harder for producers to look at you. Well, this movie is custom made for, actors and actresses that are, 65 to 80. And we've contacted a bunch. We've been very surprised at the warm reception that we've had.
Local talent?
Well, we're in Los Angeles, so
Yeah.
And so I'll just say that my goal as a director is to try to get 5 or 6 Academy Award-winning actors in the, it's not really.
Wait, your goal? 5 or 6 Academy Award-winning actors?
Yes.
I would have guessed if you said I could. My goal is to get one.
No,
that would have been. I mean,
no, we've got one already. The goal is to populate that table. With award-winning actors, and it's not, as a relatively newbie director. I've directed a feature last year. My greatest insurance is to have great actresses and actors.
So when you
around
have
me.
these 5 or 6 around the table, and your goal is that these are going to be pros.
Absolutely, well, better.
How
than
much
pros.
do you, as the writer and as a director, how much do you encourage and allow them to go off script and ad-lib and take it where they see fit?
It's funny. It relates back to the, what happens next is a post-production. If you go too far off script, you of course have an impossible movie to edit. But in an ensemble piece like this, and if you're shooting a master shot and you're shooting closes at the same time, and we usually shoot 2 or 3 cameras at the same time, you can let people drift a little bit. I mean, the script is getting tighter and tighter and tighter. But if you have, and again, I can't say names right now, but if you have an award-winning, Academy Award winner actor who is, famous for going off script, you're going to let him go off script. And it's an emotional movie, so I expect to see emotional reactions from people on set, and I encourage that. And as a director, I've always kind of encouraged that. One of my funny things that happened the last movie, I had a couple comedians. And, I don't think they ever did the same take twice, ever, or the same scene twice. But in this case, these are, the scenes, they have starting point and ending point, and you know where you want to be at the end of it. But if in the middle of it somebody comes up with something that's genius, you leave it in. We've done 3 table reads with this script already. And
So you wrote the screenplay, and you've also chosen to direct your own script.
Mm-hmm.
Why did you decide to direct it versus hiring a director?
If some huge director came along and said, "We love this so much, we want to do it," that's great. But as a new artist, you're always pushing the rocks up the hill, and to really get what I want out of this movie and to put on screen what I envision, I feel as though I'm not only very capable, but I think I'm very in tune to direct this thing. Technically, I'm very technical, so I never worry about that side of it. The DP who we're going to use is brilliant, and so I'm not really worried about that side of it. But from the story standpoint, and when I directed the last movie, that my premise about directing is that I always tell everybody, number 1, you're going to look beautiful. I'm going to make sure you look beautiful. Number 2, I'm going to make sure you sound great. And but to me, if the feeling isn't there, if the sentiment isn't there in the words, if they don't come out across from the actors, what was the intent of the page, then you're failing the script. And I don't think anybody knows the intent of the page better than I do.
I want you to flash to the first night that it's finally being exhibited. I don't mean at one of the festivals. I mean, it's a real movie.
Mm-hmm.
People are going to watch it. And you're a fly on the wall as they're walking out through the lobby or down the aisle, leaving the theater. And you could hear what they're saying. What do you want? What do you hope they're saying?
That's a very good question.
I figured it wasn't one that you were ready
You know,
for, but from your heart, like kind of.
I would like to see tears in their eyes. The ending is extraordinary and a little bit unpredictable. It's not what you would expect. It touches on a lot of areas of faith, a lot of areas of life and death. I mean, the movie's about life and death and living your life and looking at your life. And I would like it to be a window that people can open and look at their own lives and perhaps realize they need to get more out of it. But I hope to see a lot of people doing this. I hope to see a lot of people truly affected by it. I didn't write it that way. I wrote it. I mean, I write comedy more than anything. Some really ridiculously funny things in this movie. but it's also it's a movie about life and death and realizing your life to its fullest.
Kevin Kent, you're making a film that is obviously meaningful to you personally, and will be meaningful to hopefully millions of others. Buster and Sarah will look forward to seeing it. Thank you again, Kevin Kent. Good luck to you on the film.
Thank you very much.